All right, so we're back. I believe this will be our third installment on our YouTube stream of the House Gov.Ops and Military Affairs Committee here on this lovely Wednesday morning. And so we're back for a walkthrough of, I believe we're on draft number 2.7. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yes, 2.7 is the latest. Sorry, too many tabs open. Tim, thanks for being with us. We'll start at the top, and if you want to skim through some of the things we've seen, we can take this at a first pace, and then we'll stop you when we have questions. And before Tim really goes through the walkthrough, I'll tee this up. So after hearing much of the testimony we had last week, and also taking some of the thoughts that we've kind of heard over the last few days and this morning even, with Mr. Rogers' testimony, I am putting on the table here with some of these new sections, not just the electronic returns issue that Director Setting has brought, but also some new proposals that I would view generally as a compromise around the ability to continue to have multiple parties nominated, listed on a general election ballot for Vermont candidates. So I'll have Tim kind of walk us through, but basically this is my attempt at trying to square many of the things, probably not all, but many of the requests that we've heard in testimony and some of the concerns folks had about the elimination of multiple nominations. So Tim, take it away.
Thank you very much, Chair McCarthy. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. The bill you have before you, the draft is 2.7. The committee bill number is 230705. And the changes, as I mentioned before, have been highlighted between draft versions just for identifying new text. Broad strokes quickly. These highlighted changes accomplish a few different goals. One is, provides a candidate parties to be printed on ballots in a certain order, removes the prohibition of cross nominations, adds minimum thresholds for write-in candidates in primary elections, and as we had already discussed, addresses electronic ballot return. Also, and you'll kind of see this with kind of one-off little highlights, we took the opportunity between drafts to correct some statutory cross-references and bring some of the text into conformity with our Legislative Council drafting conventions and standards. So just kind of making my way through the bill, top to bottom. The first highlight you'll see is under the sore loser act at the bottom of page 1. That's just merely changing the word may to shall for clarification. Skipping down to the highlight on page 2, you'll see the same thing. Now entering the part for, independent candidate filing deadlines has not been altered. That's on page 3 or 2. Page 3, campaign finance limit for statewide candidates has also not been altered. Also at the bottom of page 3, biennial committee reorganization reporting has not been altered. Near the top of page 4, we see the first area of substantive change, and this is candidate parties printed on ballots. That's the reader assistance heading right there. And we jump into section 6, which amends Title 17 VSA, section 2474, or choice of party. Now, some of this was already being amended in previous drafts, but now it's been amended in a different and distinct way. So I've just kind of highlighted the entirety of this section for our purposes. You can see, on line 8, we have subdivision A1 has been removed in entirety, and 2 has been modified to basically take the place of 1, and I'll just read it as follows. Subsection A of section 2474, a candidate is nominated by more than if a candidate is nominated by more than one party, the Secretary of State shall print on the ballot those parties next to the candidate's name by listing in this order. 1, the major political party for which the nominee has his or her name printed on the ballot in the primary. 2, any major political parties for which the nominee received write-in votes in any order from highest to lowest vote counts. I should note here, that should probably read any major political parties for which the nominee is nominated, not receives write-in votes. And we intend to make that edit going forward. 3 is, 3 and 4 are substantially the same, or are indeed the same, just renumbered. And these edits right here just kind of shift the order. What was B followed by C is now actually really C before B. And I can pause there if we want to talk about the significance of that change, or we can kind of go into subsection B and kind of finish out this section if you like.
I think it would help if I give a 3-sentence description of what happened there. If you can see, the stricken through language from the old A1 was the process by which, so any candidate at any level ends up receiving more than one nomination. They had the opportunity there under A1, if you read through the strike through, to notify our office of the order in which they wanted those parties to appear.
RDDR.
Right. They would get nominated, say, by the Democratic Party by primary, the Progressive Party by committee nomination. They could still send an email to our office and say, I'd like to be listed as DP or DP, what have you. If they did not do that, right, within the time frame, this is when we're in the crunch to create the general election ballot. So we got to put timeframes and deadlines on these things. It was 10 days, I believe. 5 p.m. on the 10th day following. If they didn't do so, we then had to have a fallback standard order in which we put those multiple party nominations on the ballot. That's what we reverted to for what now will just be the dictated order. The candidate doesn't have the option under this language as it is to tell our office to switch. And instead it says we are going to list them on the general election ballot in the following order. And to summarize A, B, C, D, it's the party you had your name on the ballot in the primary and won, so that your printed name on the ballot. Then if you were to have received the nomination by write-in votes, that major party would be next. Then any party by which the committee, a party committee nominated you, major party, and then a minor party committee nomination. That's going to be the default order in which they fall under this language. And as Tim noted, with regard to the write-in one, it's drafted right now to say any party in which you receive write-in votes. That was it should be, you know, a party by which you won the write-in nomination would be in that slot, that third slot.
Representative Chase.
We've talked about primaries and then write-ins and party nominations. I've just been kind of assuming, but I figured I should probably ask out loud. Can a person have their name on more than one party's primary?
No.
That it's specifically not allowed in the law?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hankel.
So not to be obtuse about this, but there have been a number of versions floating around. This seems to me like a total turnaround from what was previously in language.
I would say not a total turnaround, but halfway.
Okay.
So as I teed up before, this is my attempt at a compromise around this issue about fusion candidates. So the way I would frame this for what I'm trying to accomplish is that the original proposal on the table just said, you pick a lane, you only get that one nomination, and you cannot have a second one.
Yeah.
This says you file as a DNR party. That is the first one that will appear on the general election ballot if you win. And as we'll hear further, if you do win that party primary, you could also either be written in or nominated to fill a vacancy by another party and take a second or perhaps even a third or fourth party designation. So it allows serve for folks who have the intent of truly having more than one party nominated, and they have a real desire to have that as a candidate on the ballot so that they can say to voters, I have been nominated by this party and this party, and maybe even a third or a fourth party. This allows that to stay in place. So this is a compromise where it's raising the threshold for doing that, and also saying that the one you file on has to be the first one that appears, but it is not completely getting rid of the potential for so-called fusion candidates.
So thank you for that. So I'm understanding the first listing as the party that you declared that you were going to run on that ballot in the primary. Any write-ins that come in during the primary, this does not address that. You have to have an actual party nomination to be on the general election ballot as a dual party or whatever candidate.
So we're gonna get into that in the next pieces, but what I'll say is that the intent here is that similar to the way it is today, if you, and assuming that you want that nomination, you would file your consent to be a write-in candidate. So part of what you have to hold in your head here is that this bill in its entirety envisions this new thing of filing a consent to be a write-in candidate and to get your votes counted.
In May?
No,
or
later.
after
The Friday before for a primary.
2 weeks prior.
Yes, yeah. So the idea is you could do it in May, but the idea is that you would file and say, okay, I'm running as, let's say, a Democrat, and I also would like to be a write-in candidate and try to get the Republican nomination as well. And so if I filed my consent form and my petition for my first one, for my D in May, and then sometime between May and the Friday before the primary election, I would also file a consent to say I'd like to have my votes counted in the R. So I have as a candidate some intent to actually want to be a fusion candidate.
Okay.
But all I have to do is just file that form. Then further, I'm saying you need to get at least 10% plus one of the write-ins of the total ballots cast. So if there are 500 Republican ballots cast in your district in that primary, you would need to get 51 votes. So that we're raising the threshold at least to where I think Representative Shai was trying to make it in H97, where instead of it being, 25,
yeah.
It's at least 10% or the number of signatures, whatever's higher. So that's what you're going to see in the further sections that Tim will walk us through.
Okay, and just one last thing. So that essentially throws out you don't do all that and you don't receive the prescribed number of votes, that throws out any votes that somebody would write you in on the ballot, but you don't get enough, so their vote essentially is gone, thrown out, it doesn't matter, right?
So what we're specifically talking about here is just the ability to get a second nomination. So that candidate would still appear if they won their major party primary that they had filed in, they'd still appear on the general election ballot. So I would say that those votes are similar to when somebody, for instance, like I had some people write in my name on the other two primary ballots where I wasn't a written candidate. I wasn't seeking that party's nomination. I'm glad there were a handful of people who liked me that affiliate with other parties. That's great. But it didn't actually advance me at all in the primary because I wasn't seeking those nominations. Those, in a sense, are kind of count the same as if somebody wrote their own name in.
So,
Yep.
no, sorry, Queen.
What would happen in the situation where that candidate lost their primary, but won the write-in for the other party?
Under this, if you file on that thing and you lose the primary, this bill envisions a sore loser law so that you would not be able to appear on the general election ballot.
I would note, since we're right there, I think we would have to amend the language to accomplish that goal. Right now, it says you can't be nominated by another party's committee. It doesn't foreclose the option of you winning by write-in in
Right.
the other party.
Exactly.
Okay.
If that was the intent of the committee, we'd have to write that in. Like
So right now,
Because that's the way I read it,
yeah,
yeah.
so the way this is crafted right now, that if you could potentially lose your major party nomination, but then win a write-in for an open and have your name appear on the ballot.
That's how I read this, yeah, exactly.
Interesting. That was not my intent in the drafting, so.
That's why we're doing this. I was reading it the same way. I was like, I think this is not what we're looking at.
Let's ruin the system.
The other part of this that I think that's flawed in your thinking is, you're thinking that the people that voted for you as a D are a D. They may not be. You can pull a Democratic ballot and be a Republican.
Of course, yep.
So, you know, the way you explained it to me, it sounded like, and Representative Hango was talking about it too, as far as those D votes not necessarily showing up that way, where, again, that's what I don't want to lose in a sense, because a lot of those may be Republicans that voted for them. They pulled a Democratic ballot.
So, if I want to understand that I think the issue you're bringing up is specific to the idea that we're only counting the write-ins when somebody says they've consented to be a candidate. So you're saying that you would prefer that those still be published, those be recorded and published.
Yeah.
Okay. I think when we have, did not think that would be the key point of thinking at this point, this juncture in the conversation, but I'm glad to have that flagged. Representative Morgan, go ahead.
Maybe I'm getting ahead, but, and tell me, I'm sure you'll tell me if I am, but to go one step further, you win your, as Seth called it, your primary that you filed for in May. You get it, the 10% plus one for the other party. And you are the number one, that gets you to the number one in that party as well. Then what? Am I making sense, or am I got it wrong?
So if you've essentially won two primaries, then you get to have two names printed on the ballot. So that was really
That's the compromise you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it now. That's exactly it. That's what I was trying to get on the table was.
Right, that's what I thought you were getting at.
Yeah.
I think that's because it's, okay, so that's a change from what we were, okay. So that's the compromise, okay, got it.
So the fusion candidate concept still exists here. It's just sort of the access to it is structured a little bit.
So, but when you're and I'm getting even another step, so then they go to list you in the general election, you would be then a RDDR or no?
Oh, no. So.
What about, I'm missing a component here, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you
dense on it, but.
So we have three major party primaries, right?
Yeah.
And so if you win the one you filed in, so let's say I run as a Democrat, I win that one, I file to get the P, for instance.
Yeah.
And I get the 10% plus one, I'm automatically in there. Then I could be, under this, a Democratic / progressive on the ballot.
On the
general election ballot.
Right.
And that's what I think you were saying.
That's what I'm saying. You still would have that fusion candidate capability.
Yes.
I thought we were trying to wipe that out completely, was not, I'm just saying as that was why I thought we were heading, and now it's.
So after hearing very strong sentiment both on the committee and from the folks testifying, I am putting on the table for the committee's consideration today the idea that instead of getting rid of the second nomination possibility, the fusion candidate possibility, that I'm raising the threshold and making it more intentional than I think it is today.
The key being the 10% plus one another. Gotcha. Okay.
Well, and also you do need to file the intent to the Friday to the
Yeah,
Friday.
it has to be
You have to be
deliberate.
like recognizing as an individual that you are in fact seeking.
It can, because you put a Facebook post out saying, please do this, you gotta be deliberate about it.
Very much, yeah.
Okay.
That messed me up with what you just said. Because my understanding was that if you got that 10% plus one, regardless of whether or not you filled out the consent form for that party, you would get it. But now you're telling me you still have to file that consent form, even if you get, the 10% plus one.
Right.
You'd be doing it ahead of the
As
primary,
drafted.
As drafted.
before the vote was even held.
Yes, so what this envisions is that somebody who wants to be a Fusion candidate, it's a pretty low, I mean, you just have to file a consent form a week and a half before the election. And then get the votes.
But you'd still have to be a victor, though. You couldn't just be that you got 10%. You'd have to be enough.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you can't just be, you'd be like fifth in the pile and go because you got 10%. You got to be the
Right.
one or two if it's a 2-seat district number one or a 2-seat district 1 or 2.
Yeah.
In that then.
Yes, and it's the plurality language that I think is in here helps accomplish that.
Okay.
And I'm seeing Director Senning calculating through, listening to these questions. So if you have anything you can say to clarify any of my comments, that'd be great.
Just a little bit, and just because it seems like we're at a point of good understanding here, that the hypothetical that was laid out is right. The primary, you filed the petition in, you win that.
Yep.
That's gonna be, you get the D. If, and it is what you said, Rep. Higley, you both file the form and meet the threshold, is how it's drafted right now, you could get the next party's nomination.
Yeah.
What we were just looking at under the choice of party, the effect of that is that you can no longer flip those. This is telling you what order those need to go in, and it puts the one you filed in first,
Your primary one would be your first.
the one that you won by write-in second. And then I just wanted to note that there's still the third option under here too, to be entirely clear, that a party committee can then also nominate.
Right.
So you did DER, you filed in D, you filed the write-in paperwork and met the threshold, so you got the R that way. You could also have the Progressive Party Committee nominate you as a P. And under the order laid out here, you would at that point be DRP. Puts you were securing a nomination by write-in that's in second place, and then by committee nomination in third place. If you're allowing for dual nominations, unless you want to carve out something else that says except not by party committee, you have to do that. You have to be clear, because that's a valid way to nominate a candidate still under the chapter.
I think at this point, what I was hoping to accomplish, what I was hearing from all of the experience, testimony, my, years of doing elections and participating in them in one way or another, was that the process of nominating have a little bit more integrity than it has today. And I hold in tension, and I think often one of the reasons our brains melt when we think about all of this is all of us have different ideas of what the party nominating process is for, who the selectorate who selects our candidates should be. And I think to Representative Higley's point, there's nothing in here that changes the fact that we have open primaries where a person who most of the time votes in one major party's primaries or for that party's candidates on the general election ballot, they can choose in any given primary year to vote in another party's primary. That's been the status quo in Vermont, and this bill doesn't change that. But it does say if you want to have multiple nominations, you should be a little more intentional about it, or allow the party committee to be part of that nominating process. So this does preserve intentionally. I wanted to preserve the party nominating to fill a vacancy.
So it's more deliberate, it's more formalized, is a good way to put it, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say that, and I know some folks will not like this, but I think that for me, I care about my party's brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in many Democrats, many Republicans for their brand, we heard the chair of the Vermont GOP talk about this exact thing. So this is not a partisan thing, but in each of our parties, I think we care about like, what is the nominating, what is that badge that's officially printed on a ballot, the general election ballot for all those voters? What is the designation of that primary, of that party mean? What does it actually mean? What does it signify? And it's almost like a Rorschach test right now. You know, it's like, and I just want to have it be a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more clear what it means. And in our races, you know, right now, you know, it's half of the number of signatures is the threshold. So if there's a vacancy and you get, you know, 30 votes, 26 votes, you know, you absolutely have locked in that party's designation on the general election ballot. And I think that's a huge part of why you have, you know, 60 ish candidates in the last general election that were quote unquote fusion candidates. And I think if you ask many of those candidates, do you really identify with the values, the platform, do you associate with that party that's your second designation? I think a lot of them would say, you know, I've never voted for that party or rarely have. And I think just a little bit of intentionality around asking for that consent form to be filed and then getting a slightly higher threshold of votes provides the increased integrity that I'm trying to get in for this piece of the bill. Representative Murphy.
I appreciate what you're sharing, and I agree with that, and I would go a little further that I think as a party, we expect a relationship, a mutual relationship, that we're not looking for a friends with benefits relationship, that we want people showing up for more than just the election with your name on it, or not making that 2 a.m. phone call from the bar on Saturday night.
Where are you getting your votes?
I don't want to push this metaphor too far.
I'm enjoying it.
I'm enjoying it. So let him riff.
I want to commit to the party if we're going to, and I want it to be mutual. And I think this is where it's going. That we want people to step up. We have an open tent. You know, I can say that I think there's a pretty wide spectrum of thought that you're going to get in the Democratic Party, and that's fine with me. But the people who make the commitment to the party are welcome. And the people who just show up once in a while or when it's convenient, I don't appreciate.
To clarify, I think what I'm hearing is an ask for a party registration kind of direction. Is that
I'm not
what you're
saying that, but I don't think you need to go that far to expect a mutually beneficial relationship.
And I think what I'm trying to do with my compromise proposal is to hold open for people who truly have multiple party affiliations, are supported by people who vote, that it's a higher, more meaningful threshold is what I'm putting on the table. So what I'd like to do with the 10 minutes we have before lunch is to walk through the actual words on the page, just so we can get as far as we can with the bill itself. We are going to take more testimony on this bill. And I also wanted to, I would really like to try to get Carol Dawes' feedback about the electronic ballot returns. So if floor is going to be short today, very short, I might say we come back after the floor briefly and pick this back up. So Representative Hooper and Representative Waters Evans.
No, I was scratching my face.
Okay. I'm trying to be.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, what's your question?
I think it'd be terrific if we could get an independent in here. And if I could have my pick, it'd be Laura Sibilia. Do you think we could invite her to?
So she has asked to testify, and I am not barring members, but it's very touchy having members of the body come and sit in a witness seat. So, I'm open to that if there's if there's a specific perspective, John Rogers was here this morning,
Right.
for instance.
But he's not an independent.
But well,
He had to be.
He's a former member, he's not a sitting member. Yeah.
so
we're trying to-
having sitting members testify.
John.
John is John.
So, I'm open to that and I wanna have voices, but they have other ways to tell us. Sitting members have a lot of opportunity to tell us what they think about a bill without being, sitting in the witness seat.
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Hancock.
So then can we find an independent who's not a sitting member? Because I'm not seeing in this new version where it really addresses much about independent candidates unless I've missed something.
We haven't changed anything about what I had originally proposed, which is that independents file in May at the same time that major party candidates file. And the reason we haven't talked much about independent candidates is the major party primaries are there are 3 separate elections that are happening at the same time. And so if you're running as an independent, you're not trying to get a major party designation, you are an independent. So all of this stuff comes down to us talking about the relationship between the parties and the state, and the Secretary of State's direction to the Secretary of State about how to administer those major party primaries. So if you're an independent, those parts aren't really relevant to you. The only change I made from current law in my original proposal, and it hasn't changed in this draft, and unless there's some piece of this Timmer will that has some tangential impact on it, but it was just to move it up so that everybody files at the same time.
And I think that's a major policy change or major change for candidates who would like to be independent candidates. And I think it's eliminating some people who may decide later to run and run as independents. And I'm not saying they're sore losers because maybe they weren't going to run anyway. I'm just kind of thinking about my own situation and the election that happened prior to me getting appointed. And I think had I known the candidates who would have run, which I couldn't have known if I had the same filing deadline as them, if I were an independent, this is all if, I probably would not have known, but maybe would have put my name in after the primary, knowing who won the primary. And this is very convoluted. I understand a lot of people probably wouldn't understand it, but the person who ended up winning ended up not taking their seat. And that's how I got appointed. So had I known that that person would have won the primary, I may be, if I were so inclined to have thought about it really hard, thought, well, this is the chance to jump in as an independent, for instance. So I don't want to take that away from people, but I just wanted to bring that up because we hadn't talked about that today and we kind of skimmed over that section.
Chase.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying. I think, at least in my mind, I picture independent candidates as an intentional candidate who has decided they want to run to represent their people. They just don't feel like the parties align with what they're wanting to accomplish. And I think what you're describing, at least in my mind, it would use the path of the write-in candidates. So anybody can do the write-in up to the Friday before the Friday or whatever, general, file their consent. And that's their, I just decided at the last minute, I want to run, here's that path to do it. And at least the independents that I know are much more intentional about their choice to run.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I didn't mean for it to sound like it would be a last minute thing. It was just a really odd situation that hard to describe.
I hear you.
But I also think some of the scenario that you mentioned, Representative Hango, it seems that the filling of a vacancy process and the appointment process that we have when, if somebody wins and then they decide not to actually seek the office, that there are other remedies than allowing folks after the primary to file as independents. I actually am, very obviously putting this on the table here, from the original draft of this bill language, I really think that people who want to run for office should, declare that they are running for office and running in a primary or running as an independent, that it should just be one system. The idea that we kind of can like wait and see who the candidates are and then jump into an election, you could do that as a write-in candidate. But I just think that people who are intentionally, they've decided they want to seek an office, they're thoughtful about it, that everybody should kind of pick a lane and get in there. And that's been my belief from the beginning of this process. And then in hearing all of the testimony and all the thoughts and the hallway conversations and people calling me up and emailing me, I've put this compromise proposal around the multi-party nominations process on the table. And we'll have some time to think about it. So I don't know if Tim is available this afternoon. But if we could get this back up, either at the end of our the CCB testimony that we're going to hear this afternoon, or when we get back from the floor, because I think floor is going to be really short. I don't want to keep people super long today, but I would love to at least get through the language by the end of the day, and then we've got more on this scheduled on this tomorrow afternoon.
Do we need 2 hours on the CCD one?
There's a lot there, and we may. So,
Yes.
so I think we'll. If are there any before we break for lunch? Are there any pressing, burning things folks want to put on the table for us to
Clarify, you were talking about Josh Aldrich, is that correct?
I don't want to mention people's names.
Guy ran for office, so you can't say his name on the record, I mean.
I don't know. And I'm also not necessarily talking about myself. I'm talking about other people who may have wanted to jump in
Okay,
as
that's
well.
answer my question.
Yeah.
The only thing I guess I would like to say, Mr. Chair, is in regards to Representative Hango's importance of listening to somebody who's an independent. We've heard from the Progressive Party, the Republican Party, Democratic Party. Independents don't have that party apparatus. And for you to say that, well, they're in the building, we're going to hear from them. Yeah, we're going to hear from them on the floor of the House. And when it gets that far, it's pretty much a done deal. So that's why I think it's important to.
So I don't want to silence any voices. So we will hear from at least an independent candidate before we take a vote on this bill. I will commit to doing that. I hear that loud and clear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Byron.
Okay, so my comment is actually more for legislative council, and it's structural, not policy, so shifting. I saw some her/hises in there, and I believe we were structurally trying to get away from that. Applying a there.
We will update that to strike any gendered language.
Cool, just an observation technical.
I think we're getting away from there too. It's mostly the candidate,
the
or the official orders.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that was an existing statute, right? Representative Byron, it wasn't in the new pieces.
There was a highlighting on that one.
Yeah, so a lot of existing statute was
highlighted for context.
So,
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that's confusing.
I just wanted to, it would just pop, my eye grabbed it. Just wanted to say it out loud.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that's a good point. So great. Well, we will either pick this back up later this afternoon if we have time, or we'll get back to it tomorrow. But I appreciate a really thoughtful conversation this morning. I know there's a lot here, and we will